Okay, let's see what we have on the agenda. Yeah. Yeah. Talking about the mod system took a while. Let's see what else we have. Oh. Oh. Uh, we'll just... Yeah. There we go. Ah, guns. I love them a lot, you know. So much so that I use them way more often than the wonder weapons. So what would my game concept be if I didn't add all my favorite guns to it? Plus some additional ones that I created for myself. But we'll get to that a little later. First I want to talk about a little conspiracy of mine concerning Warzone and the games it's tied with. The way Warzone progressed made me think of a roadmap they had in mind. Their game would implement several important times of conflict throughout its entire lifetime. MW was the present, Cold War was, well, the Cold War, and Vanguard was World War II. If they hadn't been acquired by Microsoft, I believe the next two time periods they would have implemented would have been the near future, like BO2, and the far future, like BO3 or Infinite Warfare. But seeing the acquisition, it's hard for me to say they'll stay on this path I've completely made up for myself. But it serves as an opportunity for me. In the description I have given you all another Google Doc of all the classic Black Ops Zombies weapons I would like to see return to this game. We could easily say that they appeared through some Dark Aether shenanigans or what sort. While still on the topic of Warzone, I envision this game being the sister game to Warzone. One supported by Treyarch and the other by Sledgehammer and Infinity Ward. Being the way that it is, I would want all the Warzone guns to be ported over to this game. This allows for weapons of all different eras to be used for zombie killing action. Plus their Pack-a-Punch variants would be a huge attraction. And on the personal note, I would love to see how loadouts hyper-optimized for Warzone would translate over to a zombies game. I bet it would be pretty funny. Now that we got that slight tangent out of the way, let's start talking about a slight change I would make to a certain weapon class. Melee weapons. To me, they are largely unattractive. Whether it's them not having a huge presence in zombies to begin with, melee weapons that can actually kill that are just so out of the way to obtain, or them being easily obtainable but just not sharing the same horde killing potential that bullet weapons have. So I've decided to add a slight buff to all the melee weapons that would be in this game in hopes of raising their effectiveness, utility, or at least their cool factor. Some are able to give players buffs, have new unique attacks, and even have triggerable abilities that need to be charged. However, keep in mind that these abilities are not present until they are Pack-a-Punch for at least the first time, making them an investment. Also, their abilities only occur while they are being held out and do not apply while they are stowed, except for some select ones. With the base weapons out of the way, let's talk about what goes on them after Pack-a-Punching twice. AATs. Introduced in Black Ops 3, these were the special ammo types that perform essentially the same thing. Kill zombies, but with different elements. The balance for these AATs have been flippant throughout the years. They were overpowered in BO3, they were trash and barely noticeable in BO4, and CW is where I feel they were balanced the best. They all fulfilled some kind of niche, with Cryo Freeze and Napalm Burst being the best. Shatterblast is OP in its own right, but it just doesn't occur often enough. Deadwire is okay ever since the nerf it had. I see it mainly used as a tool to save players that are cornered, and Brainrot just sucks. But something that all these AATs shared, no matter which game, was that they were all totally offensive, designed to kill something in a specific way. Not really any AATs that provide utility or survivability outright. Except Cryo Freeze, which I would say is the only utility AAT at the moment. Though some may say that damage is the greatest form of damage reduction, I'd rather give survivability and utility outright to players who are seeking them. So with that, I have created new AATs for myself. Specifically, I have 3 new AATs and 1 returning AAT. Vitaliation, as you heard in the last part, Price Point, Fireworks, and Based. They will serve as the first defensive or utility-based AATs in COD Zombies history. Except for fireworks, that one's still offensive. So with that, let's just jump right into them. First up is Vitaliation. It's vitality combined with retaliation. Genius, right? This is the first defensive AAT I thought of, providing a 0.003% lifesteal. It will have a 66% chance to activate per bullet every 5 seconds. I put the lifesteal percentage so low because the damage scaling in Cold War is so much more than what the player needs. Take my favorite weapon from that game, for example, the RPD. Tier 3 Pack-a-Punch with Cryo Freeze and the Deadshot First Headshot bonus would put the damage at around 15,664-ish per shot. At 0.003% lifesteal, that would give the player 47 health rounded up per activation. And just to preface, I don't actually know if CW AATs have differing activation chances, but putting one on my AATs sounded appropriate as sometimes they just don't activate when I want them to. The lifesteal will also feed into this mechanic called Overheal. I will explain this mechanic further in part 5, but for now just draw parallels to Team Fortress 2's Overheal system. But you may have noticed that the RPD example only translates from the highest damaging scenario. Lower tiers are intentionally designed to struggle using Vitaliation. As let's say the Krieg, it does base 1,473 damage at tier 1 Pack-a-Punch and Deadshot equipped. Applying the lifesteal percentage, that would only grant a whopping 4 health of lifesteal. Building Vitaliation this way makes it an alternative endgame AAT, though still not too OP on its own since the player would be giving up the benefits of Cryo Freeze and Napalm Burst. The most ideal weapons to use this AAT with would be snipers, melee weapons, and certain special weapons. The reason I didn't say shotguns is because I would make Vitaliation work on them a little bit differently. Only the highest damaging pellet will grant lifesteal, and does not stack with the rest. That way players can't get crazy amounts of overheal from them. Next is what I would consider to be one of the most viable early game AATs, Price Point. I took a niche from Cryo Freeze and made it its own AAT. Since Cryo Freeze activates the most out of all the AATs, it gets the player the most bonus points for killing enemies affected by an element. It's a new utility AAT in which shooting an enemy has a chance of doubling the points associated with that kill. Long shot, elemental effect, crit, all of it. It has a 3-second cooldown with a 75% activation rate. It functions as a viable early game tool should the player be satisfied with not receiving any buffs to their killing power. Obviously, it will fall off immensely once the player is set up to a satisfactory build. Next is an absolute classic, Fireworks. The grand return of an AAT that I would say that not many people use that much. For those that need a refresher, it is an offensive AAT that upon activation will spew out a stream of fireworks from the ground and have a clone of the weapon that triggered it aimbot all nearby enemies. It will have a 10-second cooldown with a 35% activation rate. The fireworks will fire the weapon for 1.5 seconds and aimbot anything in a 30-meter radius at 480 rounds per minute. Each enemy will only be shot once, and if there are no new enemies to shoot or none in range, the fireworks weapon will shoot in random directions until the duration runs out or new enemies come within range. However, back in its BO3 iteration, fireworks instantly killed any enemy it shot. I plan to tone it down a bit so that the other AATs can compete. The aimbot weapon will only do as much damage as the weapon that triggered it as a body shot. But I do plan to give this AAT more Slayer mods that will return it somewhat to its former glory. And lastly, a new AAT that takes on the role another AAT somewhat failed to live up to. This is Base. I saw that Shatterblast tried to cover a need and sort of failed to do so, serving as more of a slow OP offensive AAT. So I made a better version named Based. One, because it would be really funny to call it that, and 2, it uses a resonant frequency upon activation, destroying all armor on zombies in a 4-meter radius, and heavily damaging special and elite armors. It has a 5-second cooldown with a 55% activation chance. This takes the utility of what Shatter Blast was supposed to have and gives it a higher emphasis and a more frequent activation cooldown. That covers all the AATs I have come up with. And just to let you know, all of these AATs do not activate on elites, titans, or bosses, just like the ones from CW. Now I will talk about another potentially controversial topic. I would like to add back specialists into this game, but I assure you they will not be as overpowered as they were in BO4. Overpowered in some ways, yes, but not as overpowered. I also plan to not give them to the player right at the start. Rather, I would have them be rewarded for beating the Easter eggs on the round-based maps, so a player has to work to get such powerful equipment. Also keep in mind that the player has to choose between bringing a field upgrade or a specialist. No field upgrade pro shenanigans like an MW. Our first specialist is one returning from BO3. Not particularly a fan favorite, but I believe by putting my own twist on it, it will become at least decently viable. This is the Annihilator. It is functionally similar to the BO3 Annihilator, but let's use the Magnum Research BFR 4570 instead. It is a revolver that is chambered in 4570 Government, a round typically reserved for lever action rifles. It holds only 1 charge and only has 5 shots, but charges after 25 kills or a minute and 30 seconds. Most ideal for elites and specials, due to its high damage output and penetration. It will have high Slayer mod attribution with some leader mods. It will practically phase out the hand cannon score streak. The next one is returning from BO4, and is my personal favorite, the Ragnarok DG5s. They are functionally similar to BO4's interpretation. Its level up abilities will be converted into mods. It holds 1 charge and is the most expensive specialist, charging at 125 kills or 5 minutes and 34 seconds. Ideal for crowd control, but the worst option for specials and elites, as they will not be stunned by its slam and can just power through and hit the player. In terms of mod set, I'll admit I went kinda hard on it. Boasting mainly Slayer and Survivor attributed mods, having any of them equipped has a pretty good chance that it will perform much more than any of its previous iterations were capable of. The philosophy behind the mods was basically to make them as cinematic as possible while remaining effective. And many of the mods were imagined with the combat feel of God of War 2018 in mind, so I would feel that they are the coolest out of all the specialists. Our next specialist is more of a utility one that I named the Voyager's Belt. It is a red and gold belt that flashes into the player's hands upon activation. They swing it around in their hand and throw it at enemies upon pressing the fire button. It will then trap up to 1 to 12 normal enemies for an indefinite amount of time. Specials and elites will escape after 30 and 10 seconds respectively. It has 3 charges by default and charges in 37 kills or 2 minutes and 42 seconds. Ideal for holding zombies for Easter eggs and immobilizing specials and elites for easy headshots. It has mostly Survivor and Slayer attributed mods. Next is quite the unassuming specialist, the Beggar's Grenadier. A seemingly ordinary energy grenade that deals medium damage to all zombie types. It holds 2 charges by default and charges in 57 kills or 3 minutes and 13 seconds. Upon first glance, this specialist is meant to look ineffective and under-designed. That is, unless the player realizes the mods this grenade receives. It has the highest amount of Tinker mods attributed to it, making it a highly variant specialist in terms of what it can do. Damage? It has that. Support capabilities? It has that too. And gimmicks? You better believe it has that. There are many Tinker mods that this specialist can equip, all of which can mix and match with each other as much as the player pleases. so it is up to them to find a combination that suits them the most. And lastly, a more single target focused specialist, the Violent Screech. It is a wrist-mounted pink Aether circular saw. It holds one charge and charges in 87 kills or 4 minutes and 25 seconds. It's a vicious little thing should the player want to get down and dirty against a horde, or just anyone in particular they don't like. Though the player is able to plow straight through crowds with this specialist, it is highly ill-advised, as at higher levels of difficulty, it can result in lots of trading damage. So this specialist is most ideal for elites, titans, and bosses. Though they are still able to hit back, the risk is worth it should a player be looking to end a fight as quickly as possible. It boasts a plethora of Slayer mods, and has a couple of Tinker mods that change it into a really unique weapon should the player want a different way of dealing high damage output upon their enemies. That is all the specialists I have come up with for this game. Each can be unlocked to the player upon completion of certain Easter egg quests, though that will be more specified in a later part. It is my hope that these serve as alternative options to the utility the field upgrades bring, should the player want to trade them out for pure damage. Though that's not to say that the field upgrades will fall behind because of their lack of damage. There is still plenty of mods that should make them effective in many situations that the specialists don't handle as well in. And just to let it be known, specialists do not kill all the zombies near the player, nor give them armor upon activation like they did in BO4, requiring the player to have a little more foresight when handling enemies. For our last segment, we must bring to light the one thing that serves as a significant part of a map's identity. Without them, we couldn't call this a proper COD Zombies game. These are the Wonder Weapons. Our first up is an infamous choice, but I saw the true amount of potential this Wonder Weapon could have had back in the day, so I put my own creative twist on it, using what I would say is my favorite aspect of any game, movement. This is the Thrustodine Aeronautics Model 1987. Now if that name seems familiar to you, I urge you all to just hear me out. Yes, this is just a reskin of the jet gun from Transit. Functions exactly the same too, getting destroyed on maximum overheat and everything. What makes it different is what happens when you go through an additional build quest to give the jet gun an afterburner. The afterburner upgrade will give the jet gun an alternative fire mode that will turn it into a ramming weapon. After a 2-second charge time, the afterburner will activate and the player will be launched forward faster than any car or even the Pack-a-Punch Electro Die Machine. Turning speed is reduced due to the sheer speed. Now let's talk about mechanics. Yes, I know I was trying to get away from them, but I need to describe how these weapons function and how to acquire them. The Thrustodine Aeronautics Model 1987 is only able to be built. The primary fire damage is percentage based. It will insta-kill hounds and does 20% damage to regular zombies, 10% damage to specials, and 5% damage to elites every second. The afterburner ramming damage insta-kills hellhounds and regular zombies. Specials are heavily damaged and stuns, and elites are heavily damaged but not stunned. Each enemy hit increases the overheat by a little amount. The Thrustodine Aeronautics Model 1987 is able to be Pack-a-Punched whether or not it has the Afterburner upgrade. Pack-a-Punch will only remove the overheat destruction of the jet gun, but should the Pack-a-Punch be tiered, its second tier Pack-a-Punch will remove any and all overheat the weapon gains from just firing the weapon. Kills are now the only thing that raises the heat in it. And at third tier Pack-a-Punch, the damage percentages will be doubled. I have also come up with this thing's Pack-a-Punch name, but I'm on the fence of either calling it To the Moon or Space Racer. And as a little treat, using the jet gun with the afterburner while inside a vehicle will increase said vehicle's speed and ramming damage by 2 times for every player that is using one. The vehicle is harder to handle as a result, but it can potentially one-shot elites. This will also increase the risk of self-destructing, so make sure to run PhD floppers should anyone want to test this feature with reckless abandon. Our next wonder weapon is one that I have the deepest connection to, which means it's my favorite. It takes the old and combines it with the new to form potentially the deadliest wonder weapon in this game. The basic design concept was, what if we put a Ragnarok DG5 in a rocket launcher? Boom! The Ragna launcher was born. Think an AT-4 with a Ragnarok sticking out the front. Also, we've never had a rocket launcher wonder weapon before. No, the Hellion Salvo doesn't count, and because I'm paranoid, the Thunder Gun or the Micro Missile Cerberus doesn't count either, and I'm not considering any maps outside of Treyarch. The ammo is 1 in the mag and 12 in the reserve, and it has 2 attack modes. A quick shot will do very little damage and have huge knockback, knocking down zombies and occasionally stunning specials and elites. Holding down the fire button will charge the shot, dealing huge damage on impact, as well as a second damage instance from an 8-meter blue electric explosion. Pack-a-punching the Ragna launcher will make its ammo 4 in the mag and 32 in the reserve, and apply the quick shot knockback to the player, allowing for rocket jumps. Keep in mind that there is still self-explosion damage, so PhD is advised. Though Ragna launcher rockets explode on anything it touches in its base form, pack-a-punching it will make those rockets infinite pierce, exploding only on surfaces now. The player can hold the charge shot, letting them fire only when they release the fire button. While holding a full charge rocket, a 5-meter circular wave of electricity will pulse from the player every 2 seconds, dealing 15% damage to zombies with every wave. However, this will only work for the first initial wave and will not stun them on any subsequent wave. The stun does not apply to elites or certain special enemies that can fly. And the Pack-a-Punch name I came up with for the Ragna launcher is Thor Unleashed. The Ragna launcher is able to be acquired through a build quest or the mystery box. Our next wonder weapon is probably the product of me watching too much anime, even though I haven't seen any for like the past 2 years, while at the same time combining it with the world of Call of Duty Zombies. For better or for worse, I present to you the Claws of Vengeance. These were built as a result of a scientist losing his mind and becoming feral like an animal in an effort to harness the power of a dark aether entity. Let's call him, Tatarakuri. I made that up in about 5 seconds. He is a fierce warrior, only seeking challenge rather than glory. The Claws of Vengeance are wearable gauntlets or cuffs that go around the wrist of the player. They have unlimited ammo in favor of an overheat function. If the claws are fully overheated, they cannot be used again along with any subsequent ability until they have cooled off fully, about 1 minute and 30 seconds. It has basic melee combos starting out. A left and right slash ending with a downward cross slash which does double damage. Each attack lunges the player forward towards their next target. The Claws of Vengeance will have 2 separate buildable upgrade paths. The first path requires harnessing or stealing the power of Tatarakuri. This will rename the claws into the Pact of Chains. Taking this path unlocks 2 new abilities, a blocking ability and a rapid strike ability, a more offensive variant. Blocking with the aim button will reduce all incoming damage to 25% of their normal damage output. Damage reduction stacks with armor. Blocking does make the claws overheat, but should they block enough damage, an indicator on the gauntlets will flash and a noise notification will play. Pressing the reload button within 3 seconds of this notification will have the gauntlets explode with power, killing all nearby enemy zombies while stunning specials and elites. Normal attacks now emit slash beams with infinite pierce and deals 100% of the damage of the normal claws. Being close will have 2 instances of damage because of the claws and the claw beams. This effect lasts for 30 seconds. Afterward, the claws will overheat and the player will be forced to use another weapon. The startup animation for this ability will take 2 seconds to prevent too much cheese. The next ability involves pressing and holding the reload button, which will have the players slam their fists together. Doing so will summon a wall of ethereal fists that will start flailing rapidly, doing damage 10 times a second. So basically every rapid strike move ever. Each punch will do 5% of a normal zombie and special zombie's maximum health, while doing only 1% of an elite's maximum health. All enemies will be subject to infinite hit stun while within this attack. Player movement is reduced to 25% while this ability is in effect. The area of effect of this attack will slowly dwindle until the claws are overheated. The Pack-a-Punch name is Captor's Chaos. The other upgrade path for the Claws of Vengeance requires forming a pact with Tatarakuri. This will rename the claws into the Pact of Blood. Taking this path unlocks 2 new abilities, a summoning of this individual's avatar and a way to prevent going down. A more defensive and utility variant. If a player takes lethal damage with the claws stowed away, Tatarakuri will insult them and make the player invincible for 5 seconds. During this invincibility, the avatar of Tatarakuri will blow away all nearby enemies and instantly kill them. This ability will instantly overheat the claws. The next ability requires pressing and holding the reload button, which will have Tatarakuri form an avatar next to the player. He will move around with the player at the same speed, expressively imitating everything the player does in a hovering fashion. Kind of like how Joker moves with Arsene in Smash Bros. Normal claw attacks are still possible while the avatar is present. Having the avatar out will grant the player multiple buffs. The avatar buffs include as follows: plus 50% movement speed, plus 15% damage resistance, plus 25% weapon damage, plus 25% melee swing speed, plus 15% reload speed, plus 2 meter bullet penetration, and plus 50% more points in all actions. And as a bonus, Tatarakuri can specifically target certain enemies. If the player pings any enemy, then Tatarakuri will fly over and kill it. Elites, however, are able to hold him off, forcing him to hold them in place in a struggle. The player then has to intervene by doing 15% of the elite's health in damage or attack it with one swipe of the claws. Doing so will have Tatarakuri kill the elite with a flashy animation and a quip. Failing to do so will have the elite repel Tatarakuri, causing the avatar to dissipate and add a significant amount of heat to the claws. Keep in mind that having the avatar out will passively heat up the claws at all times. Pressing and holding the reload button again will desummon the avatar should the player not need it. The Pack-a-Punch name will be Savage Servitude. The next wonder weapon was inspired from an unlikely source, the little Overwatch clone named Paladins. Though a game I would only play solely for the feeling of hating myself, one specific ability animation gave me the idea and concept of this wonder weapon. This is the Regalis Razor, a set of bright neon yellow aether crystal throwing knives. Their primary fire is simple and straightforward. The player will simply throw the crystal like a throwing knife. They will have 125 crystal razors, though it only does 10% of a normal zombie's health and 1% of a special and elite zombie's health. Headshots with the Regalis Razor will always one-shot any normal zombie if the player hits their head. Special and elite enemies will also take massive damage if their weak points are hit. The Regalis Razor will also be infinite pierce as long as the only thing it hits are weak points. They will also have a unique melee animation, where the player swipes their arm to the side and 5 razors floating down the length of their forearm will swing along with it. The melee attack will do 5 instances of damage, equal to the amount of body shot damage the razors do. And since this weapon is also a little higher skill, it will heal the player by 15% of their maximum health for every head the razors take. Before moving on, I'd like to enlighten upon a certain quirk these razors have. Should the player affect any enemy with dead wire, then throw a razor anywhere on their body, it will explode, dealing massive damage in a 2.5 meter radius. It will look like exploded powderized glass. This is to hint players that there is more to the Regalis Razor than they think. Now we arrive at the first upgrade for the Regalis Razor. It involves refining the razors into actual proper knives by melting them down with a special fire and putting them into molds. Now they will have the shape of actual knives and fit tightly together in the player's hands. The throwing rate of the knives are significantly increased and the damage percentages are increased as well. 20% of maximum health to normal zombies and 5% of maximum health to specials and elites. They will also travel much farther without dropping off. Razors also gain a new fire mode. By pressing down on the D-pad, the player will have the razors form up around their vision in a circle. Kinda like Jet's ultimate from Valorant. Though when the player throws razors in this fire mode, they will find that they won't travel very far. They will fly a maximum of 5 to 7 meters before suspending themselves in the air.
Should the player press the reload button, the player will close their fist tightly and the crystals around their vision will shatter to pieces. All the razors that are suspended in the air will then shoot straight down to the ground. Afterwards, the razors around their vision will rewind back and reform themselves. Though, they don't seem to do much at all, just simply shooting down to the ground. Obviously, this is less than ideal. Not being able to aim at weak points reliably makes this ability kinda useless. That is where the alt fire of this secondary fire comes in. Pressing the aim button will no longer focus the player's reticle. Instead, in this fire mode, the razors always shoot 100% accurately. Pressing said button will send a special blue razor into an enemy. Now any razor thrown with the fire button will automatically track to any enemy this special razor is embedded in. And it is so precise that it will hit the exact same spot the special razor is in, making weak points easy to hit should the player not want to aim. This also works in tandem with the alt fire mode. If the player shoots any enemy with the special razor, pressing the reload button will shatter the razors like last time. But all suspended razors will jump up and home in on the enemy that has the special razor embedded in it. The player is able to set up a maximum of 100 razors in the air, which makes it ideal for traps. And should the target with the special razor die before all the razors get to it, the remaining ones will jump back up in the air and suspend themselves. The player can also shoot this special razor into terrain. Pressing the reload button will have all the suspended razors home in on that one specific spot. However, this will expend all the suspended razors since there is no enemy to track if it dies. It costs 2 razors to throw the special razor and they last for 30 seconds. But the weapon still feels incomplete. The crystals still explode when touching dead wire affected enemies.
That is why the player will utilize this power by adding a device that will induce an electric charge without having to rely on dead wire. This is the Tier 3 Regalis Razor. Whenever the player reloads, whether in primary or alt fire modes, all razors embedded in a surface will explode.
The drop-down ability will have the crystals explode on impact now, creating devastating bombing runs on the enemy. Razors flying towards the special razor will also explode on impact as well. And razors in the primary fire mode that are embedded in any enemy will also explode should the player reload. Keep in mind, however, that there will be 2 damage instances, one for the razor itself hitting the enemy and one for the explosion. This is to have it function more or less the same should players not find satisfaction with their new explosive cutlery. This will make the razors more versatile when it comes to crowd control instead of being hyper-focused on damage. The explosive radius will be the same as the dead wire explosion.
They will also be able to be pack-a-punched. They will turn a bright hot pink and deal an additive 27% more percentage damage to normal zombies and 4% more damage to specials and elites. Tiered Pack-a-Punch will increase these percentages by an additional 27 and 4% for their respective enemies for each tier.
And one last note, any razors that are embedded in something can be picked up by the player just like they can with the ballistic knives. Now we come up upon our last wonder weapon. But for the life of me, I couldn't create a 5th wonder weapon. I couldn't leave another one of the round-based maps without a wonder weapon, but that was when my friend Cernetto fired off an idea that I actually thought was pretty good, so thanks, good sir. I present to you the Deceiver Screen, a somewhat baffling and whimsical wonder weapon. It will be as if it was designed by a child. Hint hint, it could be acquired through either a build quest or the mystery box. It is a sleek-looking white glove with a dodecahedron tied to the palm with a string composed of aether energy. Kind of like a yo-yo, which also comes with a disc launcher, but more on that later.
Pressing the aim button will have the player throw the bearing. They can only throw it as far as a grenade, but it will have infinite pierce through any enemy. Enemies it has pierced through will be connected together through the aether string. If the player presses the aim button again at any time, they will pull back the bearing to their hand. Any enemy connected by the string will be pulled towards the player, knocking them down at their feet.
This damage is marginal, however, and does not do very much. But the player can use this ability on other players, pulling them towards the user. for better or for worse.
The player can also use this ability to pull themselves towards heavyset enemies like elites and titans. Then there is the primary fire. Pressing the fire button will shoot out a disc from the disc launcher. The disc will not do much direct damage, but will fall on the ground like a frisbee. After a second, it will rise up from the ground and ethereal saw teeth will jut out from the sides. It will then start spinning like a top with the power of blue wind-like aether energy, shredding any enemy unfortunate enough to get within 0.75 meters of it.
The player may notice that the disc doesn't stay in one place. It will wander around, not particularly going after enemies. It will even bounce off walls and get stuck in certain terrain. This is to help hint players that there is more to this wonder weapon. Combining the alt fire with the primary fire turns this weapon into a saw on a string. If the player uses the primary fire on the disc, they will latch together. Using the primary fire again will pull the disc into the player's hands. The saw will disappear, but it will vibrate violently in the player's hands as it is still spinning internally. Using the primary fire again will throw the saw back out at an intense speed, shredding through any enemy it runs into. The disc will bounce off surfaces and ricochet all around the area as if it was on a frictionless surface. The player can somewhat dictate where the disc goes by walking in certain directions to swing the disc wherever they please. There is no limit to how often the player can pull back and throw the disc. If the player doesn't want to hold the discs anymore, they can use the reload button to cut the string of their glove, sounding like a metal fiber wire snapping. This can also be used to launch the discs to make them fly around with complete freedom. Then there is what happens when the player charges the discs. By pressing and holding the aim button, the player will reel the saw back and hold it within their hand. The saw will hum in their hand until the saw glows gold along with a sound indicator. When the player presses the reload button, the player will throw the disc forward, disconnecting it from the line. It will tear through any and all normal and special enemies, and then explode everything in a 12-meter radius when it makes contact with any surface, elite, titan, or boss, dealing absolutely massive damage and knockdown damage. The Deceiver string will have 15 discs by default. This weapon is also able to be Pack-a-Punch. Pack-a-Punching it will rename it to the Liar's Line and increase the disc capacity to 30, while upgrading the damage of it, of course. Oh man, that was a lot of weapons to get through. But there is still a lot of aspects of this game that need to be clarified, explained, and introduced. So much so that I have to do a lot more than just move Part 6 back. Now it's completely scrapped, as well as all subsequent parts after it. The reason why is because of Conjora's BO3 custom map showcase video. It's not his fault per se, the video got me hyped beyond belief, but an entry in there made me question the entire approach that Part 6 was going to take. Part 6 is still coming, mind you, in a way, but the way I want to present it is now very different and more engaging. And Part 5 will combine all the future parts into one part to get them all out of the way before presenting Part 6, as I feel there is no organic way to bring them up in the way I plan to make Part 6. An absolute slog of mechanics and systems are coming, but they are necessary for making sure the things in this concept work and look exactly in the way that I want them to. Well, that's Part 4, everybody. Stay tuned for Part 5.